that would be very helpful because I know we're trying to make up for lost time. I guess we can thank the supervisors for making this budget work session a little happier and less gloomy than what we might have thought a few weeks ago.
Okay, is everybody at the table shortly? All right, but I think everybody's in the room so they can hear. Yes, we obviously have had very encouraging news from the Board of Supervisors as of last week, and I will ask Ms. Michael and Ms. Quinn to take it from here to explain the details.
Well, actually, I'll just do a quick update from pre-markup. Actually, Ms. Michael's going to go through the presentation and kind of give you some options on how we could balance the budget. And again, we had great news from pre-markup, so that's going to reduce our shortfall from March 31st by $33.6 million. You're going to see all that through the presentation. The other piece in the pre-markup, they've also included that as we go forward for developing 18 budget, that there will be additional meetings, joint budget meetings with the county board as well as the school boards. I think that's going to really set the tone on how we develop the 18 budget. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Michael.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here sharing this wonderful news, and I'm really thankful that today we're sharing great news. So starting on slide 2, what I'll do is I'll walk through this information, most of which you've heard in the past, but just to help anybody who's new. If we look at the FY17 advertised budget, we had a request for an increase in the county transfer of 122.7. That's the first line on this chart. Included in the county executive's advertised budget was a transfer increase of 3%. That was $54.8 million. And that left a gap between our request and the county executive's advertised budget of $67.9 million. And that's shown in the first light blue highlighted line on this chart. So as I presented at the March 14th work session, with increased state funding for state aid and sales tax totaling $16.8 million, this reduced that projected gap to $51.1 million. Then at the March 31st work session, I provided an updated estimate on our spring enrollment projection for next school year. At that time, budget staff was still finalizing the calculation of staffing for schools, so we provided you with an estimate at that point that I'll talk more about in a minute. But based on that preliminary estimate, we projected additional savings of $3 million. Then the impact of the final Virginia Retirement System state life insurance rates that are mandated by the state for FY17 required an additional expenditure of $1.2 million. So from the March 31st work session, when we combined those two changes, it reduced our projected shortfall to $49.3 million. So that's the dark highlighted bar on this chart. Then from there, the next thing you'll see is the increased funding from the county at pre-markup of $33.6 million. So at pre-markup on Friday, the county support for schools beyond the level included in that advertised budget, as Susan had indicated, was $33.6 million. That results in a total increase in school operating support from the county of $88.4 million. Right, that's relying on a real estate tax rate increase of 4 cents, so an increase to $1.13 per 100 of assessed value. When combined with equalization, that means the average real estate tax bill for county homeowners will increase by $304. So when we look at this increased funding from the county, it provides us with an increase in our operating funding of 4.84%. The last time that FCPS received a transfer that was at this level or higher was actually 2007, when we received an increase of 7.2%. So this is really the largest increase that we've seen in a decade. So when you look at that operating fund transfer, and then we include the $2.71 million for school debt service and the $13.1 million for school capital needs, the total support for FCPS from the county increased by over $104 million. So when we look at that, that represents over half of the new revenues received by the county. And as a result of those actions, the portion of general fund disbursements allocated by the county to schools remains at 52.7%. So the same percentage that we had this year. In comparison, if we compare that to the county's growth, the county's budget is increasing by 4.35%, or 4.91% when the reserves are included. So overall, this is just really exceptional news. The Board of Supervisors providing all of this additional funding for the schools beyond the level included in the advertised budget really does highlight their support for schools. So the other things that Susan mentioned in terms of their guidance included at county pre-markup was both boards, as you know, are having their joint retreat on June 14th. In addition to that, they'd like to schedule additional joint meetings in the fall. So it's anticipated that we'll have one in September and then another in October or November. And at those meetings, we'll be discussing both of our budget needs for the next fiscal year. I did want to point out some other good news included in their budget guidance. They talked in terms of our infrastructure investment, that the board directed staff to provide an update on a regular basis in terms of the multi-year funds and the progress we're making in terms of addressing infrastructure. But they really stressed collaboration in their guidance, and they asked staff, county staff, to include an analysis in the FY18 capital improvement program of a possible increase in the annual school bond capacity from the current level of $155 million. They wanted that analysis to include the projected impact on the county's debt ratios and a discussion of the affordability of the additional debt service on future county budgets. So again, positive news. And then the last thing is they also had information regarding a potential meals tax. They directed staff to schedule a discussion of the meals tax during the May 3rd Budget Committee meeting. That discussion should focus on the updates of the information that have been gathered about the meals tax, a review of other opportunities for revenue diversification, such as those that have been mentioned by board members, such as alcohol, cigarette, B-poll, and other personal property taxes, as well as a discussion of options available to the board. So just so you know that that conversation is coming up. So on slide 3, looking ahead, after that additional funding from the county, that leaves us with a gap of $15.7 million. So at the top of slide 3, we're starting with that gap of $15.7 million. So to address that gap, we're recommending the following adjustments related to additional revenue and also division-wide reductions. The first is Fairfax City. Fairfax County Public Schools operates the schools owned by the city of Fairfax. Each year, the tuition we bill them is based on our actual expenditures. Well, based on the additional revenue that we're going to receive from the county, that means our expenditures will increase, and as a result, the tuition we bill to Fairfax City is projected to increase as well. So that's an additional $0.8 million, and that represents an increase in their tuition over their FY16 tuition of 4.1%. So the next line on the chart are the final enrollment and demographic adjustments. Budget staff have completed calculating all of the staffing that results from enrollment and student demographics. And based on those spring projections, which reflect a decrease of 369 students as compared to the fall projection, we're projecting additional savings of $0.8 million. So when you combine that with the projected estimate that I gave you at the last work session, that's an overall decrease of $3.8 million as compared to the proposed budget, or $6.7 million if we look at that impact of enrollment growth as compared to our current year's approved budget. The next line are health benefits. We're recommending a decrease of $2.6 million to our health benefit employer costs based on our current participation trends. That includes the impact of employees shifting to lower cost plans during open enrollment, and it also includes a projection for a 7% rate increase for calendar year 2017. So while our budget runs on a fiscal year, our health insurance costs run on a calendar year. So looking at our most recent trends, we can recognize $2.6 million in savings. The last adjustment in this category is fuel. We're recommending that we adjust the budgeted cost per gallon for fuel down to $2 per gallon, which will result in savings of $2 million. Now, I caution us because fuel prices currently are very low, right? And because of this, we are also recommending that at year-end with one-time money that we put $2 million in a fuel reserve to help us address future fluctuations in rates. So just to give you guys an idea, we started this school year with our fuel rates really being quite near $2 a gallon, but most recently they've dropped to a low of $1.20 per gallon. Now that's a historic low. Last school year we paid an average of $2.32 per gallon, and the school year prior to that we were paying over $3.16 per gallon. So we feel it's prudent to reduce our fuel budget, but at the same time also prudent to put money in a reserve to help us address those rate fluctuations. The county has a fuel reserve similarly in their budget that totals $4 million. So our reserve would be smaller, but we think this is a good first step. Oh, so the other piece that I didn't mention, thank you, was when we look at our decrease in enrollment, right, we're really projecting a significant cost savings in terms of our enrollment. Now, since we're not 100% sure, as has been pointed out by some board members previously, if that's really an ongoing trend or if we're going to see different enrollment in the fall, we're also thinking at year end it would be wise to add additional positions to the staffing reserve to help us deal with any enrollment that comes in beyond what we've projected. So again, this is the first time we've seen our enrollment slow to this level. So if you remember previous charts that I showed you, if we look back, we had grown about the size of Arlington County Public Schools over a period of 5 or 7 years, and only just this current school year did we see that enrollment growth start to flatten. Right, so this is a pretty big change in trends. So again, it may be another prudent place to use some additional one-time funding to put in a reserve. Right, if we don't need those positions to allocate out to schools, that funding would then become available for the board's use for other priorities. So all of those adjustments together total $6.3 million. So if we start off with that shortfall or that gap of 15.7, make all of these adjustments, we're down to a gap of 9.4 million. The next piece that we have on this chart is the use of one-time funding from FY16 third quarter. As part of the third quarter budget review, we had total one-time savings available of 5.3 million. Right, at that time, we had recommended that the board not earmark those funds or not use those funds until they could look at them as we approached year end and looked at our other priorities. So while we have tried not to use one-time money to meet recurring expenditures, right, in this case, we're feeling that the use of these one-time funding to help us balance next year's budget would really be a good choice at this point in time.
And I just wanted to add that while we don't want to get in the practice of using one-time funding to balance the budget, but in order to minimize the program impacts in FY17, we felt that we can go ahead and use that one-time funding to help balance the 2017 budget. But again, it's still up to the board whether or not you wish to use one-time funding for recurring expenditures. Okay?
So if we are to assume that we allocate that one-time funding for this purpose, that does reduce that gap all the way down to 4.1 million. So the very last slide in this PowerPoint presentation shows possible actions that we could use to close that gap of $4 million. Again, as we looked at these, we were really trying to avoid any programmatic cuts, impacts to our students. So when you look at these recommendations on slide 4, the first is the after-school bus at high schools. We currently have an after-school bus at high schools 1 day per week. With the pilot of the new connector passes and input that we've received from stakeholders, and we think it would be possible to eliminate that 1 day of after-school buses at high schools. The second item on this chart is substitute pay. One of the reductions considered by the Budget Task Force was to look at substitute pay and to reduce the rate that FCPS pays to the market average in this region. We currently pay a short-term and a long-term rate for subs, and then we also currently pay a higher rate for retired FCPS teachers who sub. The only other larger district in this area that follows that practice is Prince William. So if we go ahead and average those sub rates, our short-term sub rate would go from $14.94 down just a little bit to about $14.23. And our long-term rate would actually go up from $19.69 to $20.14. Right? For comparison purposes, we currently pay retirees $22.20 for a short-term assignment and $26.45 or $26.45 per hour to substitute, right? So when we look at that feedback, the feedback that we've received as we've discussed this, is something else that we could consider looking at our subs. If our retired teachers substitute in long-term assignments, that long-term rate is just slightly below their current rate for short-term subs. Then the last item on these recommended changes is the living wage. We had previously proposed that we pay the cost of the living wage to implement it across the system out of the school operating fund. That's a total cost of $1.4 million. When we look at that cost, 1.1 million of it is for food service workers. So we had received previous budget questions about could we move the cost of that to the Food Nutrition Services Fund. And we had cautioned that we thought that would put pressure on that fund. But we now do think we can move that cost to that fund. It will likely impact expenditures in that fund. And we were considering an increase in lunch prices, and this will add more pressure as we look to need to increase lunch prices to keep that fund where our revenue is meeting the expenditures. So if we look at all of those possible adjustments, if we were to do those, that would provide expenditure savings of $4.1 million, which would fully close our budget gap for FY17. These certainly aren't all of the reductions that could be considered, but these were reductions that we came up with to start the conversation that we felt had minimal program impact and a minimal impact to our students and families. So again, thank you to the Board of Supervisors in terms of the increased funding. This has really made this presentation for me much more pleasant and really, I think, has helped in this discussion.
Okay, thank you. I also want to thank all of my colleagues who have been working with their counterparts on the Board of Supervisors. A lot of us have had a lot of private conversations, just working very hard. And I want to thank everybody, because I know every one of you has been meeting and having lunches and telephone calls, and so it has paid off. I also want to say the Board of Supervisors are very eager. They were very pleased to see how we would strategically allocate the additional $40 million for the teacher pay. That was one of the questions that they had asked us, and from what I have heard, and they actually shared that at the meeting last week, that was very, very important and played a big role in their decision with this. And I guess one of the questions, so the anticipation on health benefits, because I know you had anticipated having to raise the rates, and remembering that our health benefits go from calendar year, not school year. Okay. All right, then I will be quiet. And first we have Mr. Moon, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, Mr. Press, and then Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you for the presentation. Lots of good news to be pleased about, but I have some questions to ask. First of all, the markup by Board of Supervisors is tomorrow, and then final action, which is pro forma, is on the following Tuesday, correct?
That's correct.
And that's the day we will know for sure how much we'll be getting as a transfer from a county Board of Supervisors.
Correct.
And our board's final action date is not until a second meeting in May, which is May 26. And with that as a background, let me ask you about our needs in terms of hiring new teachers at this point, timeline-wise, because I have heard from some people, including the superintendent, that many of even our current teachers are waiting to see what the compensation decisions by this board will be like for the next year before they make their own personal decisions to whether to stay with us or do something else. If you could provide us, where things are, that what you are, possibly, wanting to hear from us today, even today, that'll be helpful.
So we've already started the process in terms of hiring. This afternoon we have transfer as teachers are looking to move across systems. I have heard feedback from teachers that they really would like to know what the salary increases will be for next year as they make their decisions. Certainly the sooner that we can make decisions in terms of hiring, finalizing salaries, any potential cuts that impact positions is critical, because I think employees are nervous. Right, and at the same time, I think the hope of knowing what that raise would be next year would be very helpful to employees.
And I think actually hearing from the board that you fully support the base increases in the budget, as well as the $40 million, and keep it fully intact and have it implemented as we presented in one of the work session. I believe it was March 31st. I think that would go a long way in our current process of hiring and all from our teachers.
That is what I wanted to know. Are we doing more and more of all the hirings of teachers? Because it used to be not until summer time frame, and then.
That's correct. This is the second year where we accelerated that hiring calendar. So we are in the hiring mode right now, and so are the other districts. So we've also heard from some principals that they're getting reference calls from other districts, and our teachers really haven't made the decisions yet, and we believe they're waiting to hear that we and the board fully support the compensation increases that are in the budget.
So when we talk about early hiring, how early are we talking about?
Well, we do early hires like in February, March, but we accelerated. We opened up all the hiring, I believe, by 2 months. So we are, like I said, in the hiring mode now.
So even now, we make decisions to hire someone. Is that fair to say?
Yes. And because we have to start our staffing in order to open school with positions filled. And, I think when we had uncertainties in the budget, there were uncertainties in staffing. Do we hire all the teachers? Do we hold some positions back? But I think we're kind of getting a sigh of relief to say, I think we need to go full speed ahead with hiring for our vacant positions. Because if we wait longer, I think we're going to lose those opportunities.
Okay, with that in mind, even though I need to give some more thought into how we'll be able to make up that $15.7 million of gap. I guess that a revenue adjustment is probably something beyond a board's control. Many components of that will be, but using a one-time funding of $5.3 million, and the other three line items that I saw as a possible actions to close the gap is something that I need to give more time, more thought into making a final decision, and won't do that until May time frame. But I, as a one board member, am fully willing to support that, as long as Board of Supervisors sends us the transfer, the amount they were discussing at the pre-markup, that I am willing to support for our employees, step plus 1% market scale adjustment, and also for teachers, additional investment of $40 million. And also, I am willing to support at this point, definitely, that putting in a $10 million to lower the class size for the elementary school, for the large class size for the elementary schools.
Thank you, Mr. Moon. Ms. Corbett-Sanders?
Thank you. And I, too, share the joy in seeing a much better budget picture. Of course, it's not done until the supervisors raise their hands, but I'm optimistic that they will continue forward with this proposal. And please, if you have not, make sure you send a shout out to the board and to our Richmond delegation for supporting Virginia's students this year. I am pleased with the numbers. I am very concerned, though, that our go-to when we look to fill the budget gap is to impact equity, because the money, the $700,000 that would be taken off the table and therefore eliminate late buses for our high schools, has a real impact on our students and our neediest schools. As a past PTA president that had to raise close to $15,000 just to provide one additional late bus for our high school, the concept that we are going to shift this burden onto our neediest schools is very disconcerting to me. I was at a meeting over the weekend or actually at the end of last week, where our students from one of our middle schools, we were talking about the connector buses, and they said they don't come to our neighborhood. And so, although I think that the connector bus system is a wonderful addition, and I would like to see us actually include the connector bus pass on the reverse side of all of our student IDs so that we can facilitate greater access, until such time that we have adjustments to the connector bus schedule and routes, I am not willing to see a support of that. And I look at our recommendations from the Budget Task Force, and I would just suggest a couple of things. Central office cleaning, if we were to reduce the central office cleaning from 5 days to 4, it would save us $400,000. And the central office custodial staff, custodial services has not been cut, while our custodial services to all of our schools have been cut twice in previous budget years. I would also suggest that we could also look at saving $600,000 by closing schools in July, since we're not having summer school at those schools. And so there are other ways that do not impact our student-facing programs, and I would urge my fellow board members to look at eliminating programs that don't have impacts on our children. Thank you.
We will have
Just
a
to
chance to
provide-
discuss all of that.
Yeah, just to provide a little bit of clarity. I thought I heard you say middle schools. We are not cutting any middle school after-school bus service. That's intact? Okay. Your meeting was at a...
My meeting was at a middle school
Okay.
where the students
Yep.
said, oh, those buses don't come to our neighborhoods.
And then, you know, the high school principals actually supported the reduction in that one-day after-school bus service at the high school level. So,
Okay, well, clearly we will have an opportunity to discuss these pieces again. Mr. Press.
Thank you, Ms. Strauss. You know, I've been working on this budget now since, I guess, a little over a year. So this is really, really good news, and this was a scenario that I think everyone, all my colleagues on the Budget Task Force had hoped for, and all of the students that I've spoken to have hoped for. What I will say is that I guess you and I are functioning on the same brainwaves today, because you took the words right out of my mouth about that, the issue of equity with regard to that after-school late bus service. There is a great disparity in how that service is used across the county, is my understanding. At Madison, where I go, it is not a very frequently used service. However, when I was interacting with students from Lee High School, they said it was a very, very popular option with their students. So I would advise board members, as Ms. Corbett-Sanders said, that we need to exercise a lot of caution as we try and balance our budget looking at that, because I firmly believe that will have an impact, although not as significant as some of the other cuts that the Budget Task Force had been considering, on student academic outcomes. If a student can't stay after for remediation or help, we are impeding their ability to succeed. What I will say is that there are many options in here, and I was, in the Budget Task Force recommendations, one of which was the pupil placement fee, which I don't know what board members have heard about this. I myself have not heard a strong backlash from much of anybody about this. And I think it, unlike perhaps our late bus elimination, would not disproportionately affect our needier students. So I think, with that said, it gives us a bit more flexibility. It's a larger line item. And I don't think that will have any appreciable negative impact on student programming and outcomes. Thank you.
Again, that'll come right back out on the table in May, all of these ideas. Ms. McLaughlin.
First of all, I guess just a quick clarification, Ms. Strauss. What Ms. Quinn and Ms. Michael have put in front of us with these suggestions, including like the late buses, if we don't speak up now, is that what the superintendent's planning to bring to us, that then we have to try and get amendments to overturn?
No, I don't know.
Okay,
This is in May. Yeah. We return. This is a suggested way
Okay.
to close it, but ultimately it will be up to the school board. What I
No, I understand it's
Right.
always up to the school board, but what I'm
Right,
trying to avoid is that if we don't speak now, then we signal to Dr. Garza that this suggestion might be palatable. And so the beauty of the conversation of us being here today is I want to echo what has been said so far. I absolutely don't support this. In all of my engagement at Woodson, I don't support the late buses for high school being cut. Even a school like Woodson, high performing, predominantly middle income, this was something that was very essential for student achievement. And in fact, I remember the principal trying to figure out when we had budget constraints and he only had one day, and the community kept saying we really need that second day. So, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, I am with you 100%, and I hope that actually we can maybe collectively let staff know today that one, no, not at all. And let me give some suggestions. Not only as Mr. Press noted, the pupil placement fee, $1.5 million. I mean, I'm certainly happy to have Dr. Garza present to us why that should be safeguarded in the budget, but I got to tell you, we provide free public education to all of our students, and if they want to be placed somewhere else, a $300 fee, again, fee waiver for those who can't afford it, I think is not unreasonable if that number is based on actual cost to the system. Why should we lose that budget to deliver funds to kids because we're accommodating them? The other thing I noticed is that the community use fee, what did get support from the task force, that's $500,000. Again, I'd rather be charging the community use fee rather than taking away a late bus. The other question I have is that it says in the budget books that the PSAT fee, which, as you all know, our 11th graders and our 10th graders take the PSAT, it says only $100,000. But isn't that a $20 test? And so $20 times $20, well, okay, we'll go with even if it's $10, which I can't imagine College Board charges less than $10 for the PSAT, but it's certainly more than $100,000. So why is it only showing $100,000 if we eliminated the PSAT fee?
I think if I'm remembering correctly, the fee was slightly less than $10, and we only pay for it free in the 1 year. So there's approximately 10,000 students at that grade, so that's how it rounds to the 0.1 million.
Okay, because someone in my community seemed to think that between what we pay for AP tests, IB tests, and the PSAT, they said to me, there's $9 million. And I said, well, I've never heard $9 million ever. But I did look and see the $100,000. Yeah, well, clearly, because the AP and IB is $3.8 million. But, I mean, I just think this is an example where I think we have to be really thoughtful about, again, what we communicated to the public about our priorities were. And Mr. Moon, thank you. I very much believe that when we look at how can we continue to address class size, I think that's got to be a priority that we see here. And so I'm looking at some things in this budget, and I wanted you all to understand. I brought this up with Dr. Garza in my one-on-ones. I mean, instructional coaches. We have 22 of them that are paid for from central administration, but apparently then we have another 50 or more, staff wasn't sure at the time, that individual principals can then also, cobble their funding together and buy that position. And what I said to Dr. Garza is I think there needs to be a decision made at the central administration level that if instructional coaches are absolutely mission critical and essential, then either they're in our schools or they're not. So that our principals can decide on their own if they're going to have one in their building or not makes me a little uncomfortable, because then the question is what positions are being sacrificed in order to pay for an instructional coach. And I continue to hear from teachers who say it's a nice to have, but when we've got large class sizes, K through 12, what are we doing here? So I just, those are the things that are weighing on my mind. And then, of course, as everyone knows, I'm going into my 5th year on the budget. if Montgomery County and Loudoun County can survive without paying AP and IV test fees for what are predominantly, when you look at the demographics of who takes AP and IV tests, it is predominantly middle income and above. I'm still worried about why we spend almost $4 million on those when it's not something that they certainly need to be paying. We need to be paying for the families who have the ability to pay, and for their families, it can be several $1,000s per course in college that they've now gotten credit for.
Okay, next is Ms. Evans.
Thank you. Well, I'm very happy to see these numbers, and certainly if the Board of Supervisors continues down the way that they look like they're going, I certainly want to commend them for their work to help us reinvest in the school system. So I will be there tomorrow, and again in a week from tomorrow, as they codify this. So this is very good news, and I appreciate their leadership on that board. I feel very strongly, I'll just make the point, I think the board does as well on the compensation piece. I'm very pleased to see that we'll be able to protect the step plus 1% and the $40 million to bring that sagging middle up. I think that's absolutely critical. So that would be the first place I would preserve, and I see you have in what you've given us here. I do think that in the next several weeks we all need to be looking at the details of where we think we need to go to be making up the rest of the difference. And I too think that we have an opportunity with the pupil placement fees. I had no problem with a pupil placement fee. That would bring us in some more revenue, whether to reduce that amount of one-time funding, or whether to, I have the same concerns about the late buses. I need to have some, whenever I talk to PTSAs, they're particularly concerned about that. I do want to have more conversations with the principals, though, in my district about that. And I think we have some other opportunities, but so I hope that in the next several weeks that we'll all be thinking very specifically about how to make up that difference and have those conversations and reach a consensus on that. And as you know, I certainly would like to move us forward on the parent liaison issue. I know you're working on that. I don't know if you have anything to tell us about that specifically today, but I'm thrilled that we're dealing with the living wage issue. You know, that's been pending for some time. I'm glad to, and I have no problem with it going into food and nutrition services. I think that's a worthwhile way to do that. I do hope that in the very near future we can move forward on the parent liaison piece as well.
Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. It's very helpful. I guess I would sound a more cautious tone because of one of the comment that was made in the presentation that this is the largest increase in the transfer. I think you said 10 years. That we ought to not only be looking at this year's budget, but planning for next year. And if we really need to move that line up for our teachers, then we need to plan on needing $40 million to move the line and also be able to fund a market scale adjustment at 1% next year. So it concerns me to see the one-time funding. I think as a board we need to not necessarily let go of all of the deep thinking we were doing on the budget and ways to wring out as much as possible and things to make sure that we are being cautious looking forward. I'm very appreciative of the Board of Supervisors' decision, but I don't want to put them in a situation where, again, next year they're forced and to come through for us. I think we need to do our part here at this board and try to be as cautious as possible in terms of funding, and that's really my perspective at this point.
Thank you, Ms.
Just
go ahead.
add one item. On the presentation, you're going to see that we broke out the one-time funding and some potential items to balance the budget. So you could see where we fall from the 15.7 million, to your point, Mr. Wilson, about that one-time funding. So above the $9.4 million shortfall, the 4 items above that is probably something we will make as an adjustment to the approved budget. And then from that point and below, the one-time funding and the 3 items on the next page are where we could have some further discussions on how to balance the budget.
Ms. Hines?
Thank you. That's helpful. So really, when we look at this, above the 9.4 is basically found savings that we're going to realize anyway. So really, we're looking at a $9.4 million gap that we have to make choices about, right? Well, that is a much better situation than we could be in right now. So thank you for presenting some ideas for us. I think I find myself agreeing with Tom that I'm worried about the 5.3, honestly, because and we know next year's already going to be tough, and that creates an imbalance to begin with. That creates a potential deficit to begin with. And we do want to continue to work on the teacher pay. There's nothing in this budget for parent liaisons. There's nothing in our planning for pre-K. I mean, there are things we're not doing. And I'd rather not set us up for next year not having already $5 million in the hole. So I would also like to go back to the list of potential other things to see if we can find 5.3 million there. I understand how people feel about the late high school bus, and I think I probably would go along with the majority on that. But again, it's another 700,000 we have to find. But I guess on the AP and IB fees, I wonder if we can find a way to do that that's kind of carefully crafted. And I know that in our conversations this year, we've looked at maybe doing it partial. Maybe we make special exceptions for certain high schools where we know that they already have a high FRM, and we're trying to encourage students to take AP tests and IB, but I also think it's an opportunity for us to, and you should never do this as a budget thing, but it may be another an opportunity for us to talk about, well, if kids are taking 6 AP exams, is that a good idea anyway? And if we're paying for all those AP exams, are we paying for something that we're not sure we think is a good goal anyway for our kids? So, sorry, let me see if there's anything else. I guess, the only other thing I would say, is that I do think, and I think Janie talked about this, having talked to Sharon Bulova, they would welcome school board members to be at their meeting tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock if you can. I can't. I have a conflict. And then at their meeting on the 26th as well. I think they feel like, they have worked hard this year to partner with us to make this investment, this reinvestment in our school system. And I think it is important, as long as we're at a feel-good place and they do what they say they're going to do, that we should be there and support the vote. So finally, I would say I am supportive of the $40 million for the salary piece. I am also supportive of the step in cost of living that we have built in there, and the $10 million for class size reduction.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz.
I'm trying to still think clearly, which I'm not professing I'm doing as well. First of all, wouldn't it have been nice if we had all settled down and had this as the goal in mind? This is almost precisely where I thought we'd wind up, and I think we would have wound up here a lot earlier had we arrived at the tone that I hear around this board table now. And so I would like everybody to maybe bottle this feeling of collaborativeness and a unified purpose with our colleagues on the Board of Supervisors. And if we could make this tone the tone next year, I think we'll be on an upward trajectory. 9.4, I think, is doable. I think there's going to be some disgruntling around the table about how we get there. I would encourage not only to try to achieve 9.4, but I know this sounds dastardly. I'd encourage more, because I don't know that next year is going to be as rosy as this year, and it's okay to sock some away. So I would look for and hope for plenty of amendments from all of my colleagues, and with the understanding that nothing is a sacred cow, that all ideas coming from all, there's no corners on this table, so all edges of this table are viable, whether it's making your case for AP and IB fees, whether it's, I don't know what. I'm not going to even fill in the blank on anything else. And I would encourage that we take an open, objective mind about how to close this 9.4. I assume that staff is going to have one take of it, but I'd rather not get to, and I'd rather have Madam Budget Chair, I'd rather have a very early understanding of where we're going to wind up with as a main motion, and not relive what we've relived over and over again as where we start, as opposed to, having to undo things. And I think maybe that's a little bit where Ms. McLaughlin was going with about buses. We don't want to be in the position where we're forcing people to undo things that we didn't necessarily agree to up front. So I think for the people who have been emissaries to our colleagues on the Board of Supervisors, you know who you are. We all have done a good job. And I'm hopeful that, I guess I'm maybe cautiously optimistic with Mr. Wilson that, I don't want to be doing somersaults, but portray an accurate message from this board that we will have the responsibility to close the rest of this, that we've done this collaboratively, and it's a path forward for our two boards and for the benefit of the kids. Is that a fair estimation, Ms. Michael? Okay.
Okay, just quickly answer your question, Ms. Schultz. Yes, the starting point is the budget that we voted on as a school board back in February. Had the employees' salary enhancements in it and no cuts to student programs. So that will be obviously where we're starting, with an acknowledgement of additional revenues. So. Yes, I know what you mean.
You know what I mean.
got it.
We don't need to go into the details
That's
here.
Fine. Just to assure you. Okay, Ms. Darina Koufax.
Thank you, Ms. Strauss. I thank the Board of Supervisors for the monies that they gave us. It was a great meeting to see them on Friday, and we know we've worked hard to get here. So I think what I would like clarity on, and maybe you and I can talk about this together, because Ms. Huff just asked, today some of us are choosing to advocate for certain things. I want this, I don't want this. I'd just like the board to have a clear understanding of dates as to when the other upcoming sessions will be. And I think they are May 2nd. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. May 2nd.
And they are on slide 5 of the presentation.
Okay.
That's right. That's when we will, May 2nd will be the first work session at which we will have the first formal discussion of how we resolve the last pieces.
Right. And I will put my 2 cents out on the table with the 9.4 gap. I'm not sure how I feel about the one-time funding yet. I haven't made a definitive decision. I do have a little bit of concern about the late bus elimination at the high schools, and I would not be inclined, and I don't want to go on my speech now about it, but I will not be inclined at all to support any fees for AP or IB.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. McElveen, Ms. Palchuk, and then I'll go back for Ms. McLaughlin.
Okay, thank you, Madam Budget Chair. So I very much support this proposal and the work that everyone's put into it. I support all of the compensation that's in it. I support the cuts that you've recommended, and I would not go beyond that at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Palchuk.
I'll be almost as brief. I definitely fully support the two priorities we had, which was for employee compensation, both a step MSA and the $40 million, as well as the addressing class sizes. In honor of wanting to have community engagement continue, since we still have a budget process with public hearings that will go through the month of May. I know they were posted up on the board. I would like to have more information and discussion with our members and with the public before giving an opinion on the other parts of it. Thank you.
Ms. Huff, and then back to Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you, and I want to join in the chorus of thanking the Board of Supervisors for the work that they did on Friday. And I'll echo, I support the step and the percent increase and the $40 million with the intent that we are going to continue this conversation. I know that the report from the actuary got canceled today. I think it was initially on the work session for today. And so I just want to make sure that we're also staying focused on that from a long-term perspective, that we are paying our teachers how they want to be paid, because I think that really affects our budget on a longer term. But I think in the short term that we're taking the right step, and also continuing the conversation of paying teachers separately in a way that the county does for their firefighters and police officers. And I also want to just toss in with what Ms. McLaughlin was saying about instructional coaches, because I also was asking Dr. Garza about this a little bit in my meeting with her. Kind of a conversation that is, if we continue to put as a priority lowering class sizes, our largest class sizes, if we also at the same time recognize some savings maybe where our teachers are being overburdened by larger class sizes, if some of these other things we've added in to reduce that overburdening, we can also then recognize the savings by reducing our class sizes and continuing to put an effort into that as we go forward. About the 5.3 million. Is that something that if we weren't to use for 2016-17 that we could put towards beginning balance of 17-18? Is that probably what the next recommendation would be?
Correct. So when we get to year end, the 5.3 million available for third quarter would be available with any other year end balances. The board has at that point options of setting that funding aside to help us address our beginning balance requirements for FY18, or they can also use them to address our one-time funding needs, right? Could be for things like the fuel reserve that we talked about today, additional positions to help us mitigate any changes in enrollment, or looking at system-wide needs that we know we have. For example, things like the world language textbooks. So the board at year end would prioritize all of those needs and then make a determination.
And the last thing I want to say is about the equity piece, just that we would be mindful as a board that when we talk about equity, that's equity for everyone. And so if we're saying that we're concerned about taking away buses, every time we talk about adding fees, we are talking about affecting a certain population of our students. From an equity perspective, because we know those with free and reduced meals would not be affected the same way that another group of students would be. So I just hope that we can be mindful of that as we talk about equity.
Okay, Ms. McLaughlin, let's go back.
Yeah, I was hoping to maybe get some clarity on where we are on the 40 million, because I felt like our prior conversations have been sort of, we fleshed it out, and yes, it was explained that we'll try and start closing the gap where we have the greatest. But part of that conversation has still been that addresses the salary piece only, and by plugging the funding in there. But in terms of if we're putting where the line is in the gap between salary only to salary only versus total compensation to total compensation. And so
Yeah, let me answer that, and I think you were there Friday as well.
Mhm.
The assumption that we are getting from the Board of Supervisors as well is that the additional funding that they are and the tax rate
Mhm.
is that we will fund the salary piece that includes the 1% and the step for all employees and the $40 million allocated strategically to those places that are the weakest. In other words, that we looked at a work session that was
Correct.
shared with the Board of Supervisors. That is their assumption that what they are giving us will fully fund that. They have
Yes.
been very well persuaded that we need
Yes.
the money. And then the other piece, which they talked about, is that we will use the $10 million to help reduce class size, and that we will not cut any upfront student programs and world languages, fine arts,
Right.
et cetera. And then obviously we've got to figure out how we're going to do the rest. Those are the assumptions coming forward.
I agree, Ms. Strauss, and I heard the same thing. That's not where my concern is. My concern is that in talking to my supervisor in Braddock District, as well as the supervisor in Lee District and in Springfield District, that and actually even talking to your supervisor, John Faust, they understand that this was not a problem we could solve in 1 year. And I think it is, from what was communicated to me, tremendous faith and support of this school system to put the $40 million, even though they don't feel that they have a full grasp and understanding of what this multi-year plan will be. And I know we all need that. And I know Dr. Garza is still working on it, because part of what we committed to was surveying our employees and getting an idea of what they want and need in their compensation. But so I guess the reason I'm bringing this up and asking the question is, it's good that we're all on the same page about the $40 million, but I don't want everybody to think that, okay, our work is done. I mean, I have shared and agreed with many supervisors that we have a responsibility to the school system and to the residents of Fairfax County to have a very clear understanding of how we're going to fully address the teacher compensation, and we're not there yet. So because I'm green lighting and supporting $40 million, I just want it on the table and hoping you all kind of feel similarly that our work is not done, and we're going to have to really understand that going forward. What the supervisor said is, if we want another dollar more beyond the $40 million, understandably, they're going to want us to have a very clear plan that says, and here's how we effectively solve it. So I don't know if I'm just the only one wrestling with this,
There
but
is an acknowledgement that, and as we have presented, we are only halfway to the market. So,
But Ms. Strauss, in all fairness, we don't know that it's going to take another $40 million of funding from the supervisors to do it. We've got to have the full conversation of what we're doing with our total compensation with salary and benefits. So that's what I mean. We don't know.
You're correct.
Correct?
But
Yes,
there are more
including
conversations.
salaries and benefits, our current estimate would be it would take another $40 to $50 million. That doesn't mean that we would do it all the following year. And you'll hear from our consultants and our HR staff members in June when we bring the compensation study presentations back to see what our implementation plans are and where we want to go with teacher salaries and the other scales where we are below market. But the $40 million does include funding the salaries and benefits, and we close the gap by a little bit less than 50%.
Thank you, and you captured exactly what I wanted to hear, that there's the recognition that we need to flesh out the rest of the implementation plan, and that's how, because honestly, we're going a lot on a really quick turnaround to saying, okay, you guys have done the work, and we're going to have to go with it, but we don't have a fleshed out plan yet.
Not the final teacher scale. This just helps us get closer to that market average.
right. And again, there it is the hope that this will encourage people to stay with us, and as principals are hiring, that is clearly, there is enough of an understanding and a concern that we need to keep our teachers here, and that as schools are staffing, and from what I'm hearing from my colleagues, that we can share the good news with our principals and that they can hire to fill the positions as needed, and that the curriculum programs will go forward as they were originally proposed in the budget. So, seeing no further discussions, again, yes, Mr. Moon?
Just one quick comment on how we craft the final budget motion. If board members go to what do you call that? Strategic Governance Manual. It's a page 89. There's a step-by-step process, how we move forward from this point to the point where we have a main motion, omnibus motion. So all spelled out.
Right. And of course, what is interesting this year is that the budget we proposed, in fact, was a fully funded budget. So we were pretty close.
You still want to take a look at
Absolutely.
all the detail in there.
Yes.
We read those first, and then if you still have questions, especially for new board members, ask budget chair and vice chair about what they really mean.
Yes, we will go through in a deliberate process. Okay, great. So we are celebrating the good news and very grateful to our funding partners. Thank you very much. So this part of the work session is adjourned.
We'll take a 2-minute break before the governance.